Hello there. Welcome to Breaking Addiction. My name's Boris, and I'm here to help you out with everything that you thought you knew about AA. One of the 5 reasons why I left AA was because of powerlessness. And we're going to go through powerlessness and break down how to actually debunk this or actually deprogram yourself from this so you can learn that everything you thought you knew about AA was actually incorrect. Powerlessness is one of those first things you're going to hear about when you first go into the rooms, okay? And that's the really tough thing that you're going to try and understand. But at first, it seems pretty plausible because it's a very ambiguous and abstract statement. But why is it that way? Well, because they don't really explain to you why, but I'll explain to you why. What first thing they're going to try and get you to believe is something that's called the diseased thinking. Now, the diseased thinking is a real problem here because back in 1946, that's when it was completely proposed, not by Bill Wilson himself, by one of his colleagues who thought that maybe this would be a good idea. The second he proposed it, it was immediately turned down by the University of Yale. The University of Yale said that this is not analogous to any other medical illness, such as things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, blah, blah, blah. Now, let's do a little bit of a history session here. We're going to talk about what they thought was a disease back then. We're going to go back to the 1930s and we're going to get you in the mind frame of what they really thought. Back in the 1930s, there was this thing called prohibition. It was toward the end of the time and they're trying to get rid of alcohol because they thought that there were these issues with people who were drinking, and they thought that the second people started drinking, that it was going to cause this really formidable, really horrible disease reaction. Things like, for example, mad cow disease. That the second you drink it, all of a sudden you're going to deteriorate and you're going to go in the hospitals and you're going to die. Okay, that's what they literally thought that was going to happen the second you start to ingest alcohol. Okay, so there are people being hospitalized because they couldn't figure out how to stop. Okay, when really the idea here was that it was just a substance that caused people to really deteriorate the way they thought. Okay, and the effects were so overwhelming for a lot of people that they didn't know what to do. Okay, so that when people were in hospitals, people literally had no idea how to help these people. So they started doing a lot of really, really messed up things to try and get people to stop drinking. I'm not going to go into that, but they did a lot of really bad, messed up things to try and get people to stop drinking, okay? And it didn't work, okay? So what then happened? Well, Mr. Bill Wilson decided, well, I have a problem too, because he was also having issues with his business and blah, 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 and he wasn't doing well with his life, blah, blah, blah. Okay, he then realized, oh my gosh, this is bad. He proposed the idea that it's a disease, and immediately Yale, not even Bill Wilson himself, again, his colleague, the University of Yale in 1946 immediately turned this down because they saw and totally extracted the idea that this chronic medical illness has not any sort of analogous approach to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and so forth. Okay, it's not the same. Because what they're trying to propose was the idea that this is actually not a behavioral or psychological adaptive issue. They thought it was an actual physical disease, when of course people said no, it's not. Okay, so we can take the idea, the disease idea, right, and we can now throw that away because we realized that there was no actual real hardcore evidence that showed that this is an actual neurological, physical, debilitating disease that continues to progress until you die. We're going to go into the methodological approach of how this started. Now, oddly enough, Mr. Bill Wilson was also trying to stop himself, okay? He tried using multiple different types of remedies to try and stop, and one of them was through drugs itself, to try and see if he could get himself to stop drinking. One of the really intense drugs was a very hallucinogenic drugs. Why? Why would you try that? Well, of course, they didn't know what else to do back then, but one day he had this real intense flash of lightning experience when in reality it was a hallucinatory drug. The drug caused that sort of experience, but in his own mind, he thought it was a very intense spiritual experience. He saw a flash of lightning, and then after that, it caused him to change the way he thought. Once he changed the way he thought, he realized, oh my gosh, I can spread the news. All these people have had a spiritual experience. Okay, but he didn't. Okay, so when people talk about this whole spiritual experience or spiritual awakening, that's not the same thing as what Bill Wilson had experienced. Okay, everyone is always talking about their own personal experience, blah, 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 but that's not even close, okay? It's not even close to what Bill Wilson had. Why? Because he was under the influence of drugs, and after that, he stopped drinking because it was so intense. For an example, to make another analogy here, people who take DMT, the intense experience of DMT is so intense that people literally change their lives because of it. Okay, some people will be so convinced it's a spiritual experience. Okay, but it does not mean that it was. It was a drug. It was a drug that caused them to do that stuff. Okay, so we can say a very, very similar approach here. So when you're trying to make a mythological approach to a physical disease that they're going to approach and say that, oh my gosh, we're going to solve this physical disease with a mythological idea, you got to wonder, is this really a real thing or is it not? Well, it's not, okay? So the whole mythological approach doesn't hold up against powerlessness. Again, if it was a real disease, any sort of mythological approach, any sort of spiritual approach would not stop the progression of the disease. Okay? It wouldn't matter how much you prayed. It wouldn't matter how much you did your meditation. It wouldn't matter how much you read the book or whatever the heck you want to go and say is your spiritual experience. It wouldn't respond to it. Okay? The last idea of powerlessness is that just because you make the choice to stop does not mean that your disease stops. Just because you realize you have diabetes and you make the decision to say, hey, I don't want diabetes anymore, right? That's not going to change the fact that you still have diabetes. You still have to manage it through medications. You still have to manage it through diet. Okay, you still have to manage it through all these physical manifestations, right, and treatments that doctors are going to prescribe you. And that gives you a higher likelihood in better quality of living. Okay, but just because you make the choice to say, oh my gosh, I'm an alcoholic, that does not change the fact that you still have alcoholism. There are 3 reasons why I decided to understand the powerlessness idea is made up. If you like the video, please, again, continue to comment and share your likes so that we can get more awareness out there. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.